They think we are stupid, we are not. They think we are dumb, oh no no. They think we are stupid, They think we are dumb, oh no no no. Do you see what I see? Because there's a pattern here that you must catch. Let's get into it. Let me tell you what's happening here. Prince William is directly feeding information to the public to distance himself from the public's outrage at what we all know to be the family's cover-up and closing ranks to protect Andrew from accountability. So he's distancing himself from his father, King Charles, and his uncle, the alleged pedo formerly known as Prince. Because when you read here, William's fury at Andrew over Epstein revelations, he's basically saying to the public, "Ooh, I was all over this from the jump. I wanted my father to kick him out from the jump. I was against Uncle Andy from the jump." Were you now? Because I know this is the family of recollections may vary and the same family of sources close to the palace. But right here, the source is William. And right now, the recollections are not varying. They are all in sync. To even put his own father in such a negative light tells you how desperate Prince William is. Because what do you mean? You wanted your father to take action against Andrew after the car crash Newsnight interview, but daddy put you in your place. Really? William seems to forget that the internet never forgets. Oh dearie me, are we off on an outing with Dandy Andy? Do you think the public has forgotten how many public appearances you all made with Andrew to make the public feel like you guys are moving on and it doesn't matter what we think? You think we've forgotten the settlement money you gave Andy to pay off his victim right here? 12 freaking million pounds. You want to act like you didn't know that? Now you just insulting our intelligence, like we're going to forget how you all tried to actively rehabilitate Andrew and got such strong backlash for it. And the Epstein files reveals how complicit the royal family was. Andrew was letting Epstein into Buckingham Palace for lunch and dinner with his friends after he was convicted. And you're telling us you didn't know that was happening? You're telling us anyone can walk into Buckingham Palace and your hundreds of staff wouldn't know? You're telling us a convicted pedophile would come into Buckingham Palace and your palace intelligence wouldn't know? Woo, thank God they left. The first best decision is that they're no longer working royalty. Second best decision is that they packed up their bags and ran. Third best decision is that they're minding their own damn business. Hallelujah.
Well, when Dr. Shola speaks, she does not clear her throat. She clears the room. What you just heard wasn't casual commentary. It wasn't hot takes designed for engagement. It was a systematic dismantling of a narrative that's being constructed right before our eyes. And today, we are going to talk about why her words hit so hard. Because this is not just about the arrest of Andrew. This is about power. This is about protection. This is about revisionist history. And this is about why the timing of certain royal fury headlines feels suspiciously convenient. Dr. Shola is a legal expert, a commentator, and someone who has consistently refused to let institutional power go unchallenged. She doesn't traffic in rumors. She doesn't deal in speculation. She deals in patterns, timelines, and documented behavior. And what she's identified is a pattern that demands attention. Let's start with the sudden storyline that Prince William was furious from the beginning, that he wanted action taken immediately, that he pushed back hard after the catastrophic Newsnight interview where Andrew basically imploded on national television. Now pause, because the public has eyes, and the internet has memory. If William was truly against Andrew from the jump, if he was genuinely pushing for decisive action from day one, where was that energy publicly? Where was the visible distancing? Where was the unmistakable line in the sand? Because here's what actually happened in the public record. After the Newsnight disaster in November 2019, there was a brief stepping back. Andrew was removed from public duties. That's documented. But then, over the following months and years, what did we see? We saw carefully staged appearances designed to communicate family unity. We saw attempts at normalcy, particularly around events where family cohesion was being projected. We saw optics designed to suggest that while there was a problem, the family itself was solid. You do not attempt image rehabilitation for someone you are internally at war with. You do not create photo opportunities suggesting familial support for someone you are actively trying to distance the institution from. And that's the core of Dr. Shola's point. This current narrative, that William was furious from the start, feels less like documented moral outrage and more like strategic positioning after the fact. Here's what's actually happening. The monarchy is in damage control mood, and when institutions feel threatened, they start drawing circles, inner circles, outer circles, and someone inevitably gets pushed toward the edge to protect the center. Andrew has become radioactive, utterly toxic to the brand, and once someone becomes that radioactive, proximity becomes dangerous for everyone else. So what do you do when you're an institution trying to survive? You create distance. You create narratives that reposition key figures as having always been on the right side. You create headlines that suggest moral clarity existed all along, even if the public record suggests something more complicated. This is crisis management 101. But here's the problem with that approach. Public trust isn't built on retroactive anger, it's built on documented, contemporaneous action. And the timeline matters. After Andrew's disastrous television appearance where he claimed he couldn't sweat and used a Pizza Express alibi, there was massive public backlash. The British press went into overdrive, social media exploded, the mockery was relentless. But that backlash came from the public first. The monarchy responded because it had to, not because it proactively wanted to. That distinction is absolutely critical. The institution reacted to public pressure. It didn't lead on principle. And now, years later, when the legal situation intensifies, suddenly there are stories about internal resistance that we conveniently never heard about at the time. That's not transparency, that's narrative management. Now, let's talk about King Charles and how he factors into this convenient narrative. If the story being pushed is that William wanted Andrew completely sidelined, but his father, King Charles, resisted or moved too slowly, that subtly reframes responsibility upward. It suggests generational conflict. It suggests youthful moral clarity versus older stubbornness or familial loyalty overriding judgment. It positions William as the reformer being held back by the older generation. But that framing raises an extremely uncomfortable question. If you are willing to let headlines imply that your father, the current king, failed to act decisively on something this serious, how desperate is the moment? Because institutions that are secure do not leak internal moral disagreements. They project unity, always. That's institutional survival 101. The appearance of division, of internal conflict, of moral disagreement between future king and current king, that signals enormous pressure. That signals an institution scrambling to position key players favorably as the situation deteriorates. And Dr. Shola zeroed in on that pressure like a laser. She's asking, why now? Why are these stories about William's fury appearing now? What changed that suddenly makes it important to establish this narrative? The answer is obvious. The legal situation has intensified, and the institution needs to protect its future. Then there's the settlement, £12 million. That number does not whisper. It echoes across every room, every headline, every conversation about the situation. The civil case connected to Jeffrey Epstein and Virginia Giuffre was not some obscure legal footnote. It was global news. It was relentless coverage. It was reputationally catastrophic for Andrew and, by extension, the monarchy. And when that settlement was paid, reportedly around £12 million, questions immediately flooded in. Who approved the settlement strategy? Who funded it? Was it private Andrew money or did the institution help? Who made the decision that paying this amount was preferable to fighting in court? Who advised Andrew through this process? These are not minor administrative questions. These are questions about institutional involvement and institutional decision-making. You cannot argue institutional ignorance when institutional resources, institutional advisors, and institutional communication strategies are mobilized around a crisis. And this is where Dr. Shola's accusation of shielding gains serious traction, because Andrew did not operate in a vacuum. He operated within one of the most security-conscious, most carefully managed environments on the planet. Buckingham Palace is not a casual open house. It's not a place where random people wander through unnoticed. If Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted sex offender, was moving through royal spaces after his 2008 conviction, that implies awareness at multiple levels. Staff would have known, security would have known, advisors would have known. There are layers upon layers of people whose job it is to know who's coming and going. So when the narrative becomes, "we didn't know," or "we weren't aware of the extent," it strains credibility past the breaking point. That is what people are reacting to, not just Andrew's alleged actions and his catastrophic handling of the accusations, but the ecosystem around him, the infrastructure, the institution that appears to have enabled, or at minimum, failed to adequately confront deeply problematic behavior. Now let's pivot to the part that makes certain commentators and royal watchers deeply uncomfortable: the Sussex factor. When Dr. Shola says, "Thank God they left," she is not being flippant or hyperbolic. She is making a precise structural point about liability, complicity, and institutional entanglement. Prince Harry and Meghan stepping away from royal duties in 2020 insulated them from institutional liability in moments exactly like this. Think about it carefully. If they were still working royals right now, if they were still on the balcony, still doing engagements, still operating as senior members of the firm, they would be forced into silence about this situation. They would be forced into collective responsibility, forced to stand united with the institution regardless of personal feelings about Andrew's situation. By leaving, they removed themselves from the blast radius. They are not implicated in institutional decisions made about Andrew. They are not responsible for how the palace handled or failed to handle the situation. They are not stuck defending the indefensible because of institutional loyalty. That decision, the decision to step back from royal duties, was mocked relentlessly at the time. They were called traitors, quitters, selfish, ungrateful, money-hungry, attention-seeking. The British tabloids and many commentators absolutely eviscerated them. But now, in this context, that decision looks strategically different. That decision looks like choosing autonomy over complicity. It looks like refusing to be part of a machinery that protects its own at the expense of accountability. And that distinction matters enormously. Now, does that mean Harry and Meghan are perfect? Absolutely not. No human being is perfect. Does it mean every decision they've made has been flawless? Of course not. Does it mean they're above criticism? Never. But it does mean that they chose autonomy over institutional complicity. It means they prioritize their own values and their own family's safety over institutional loyalty. It means they were willing to face public vilification rather than remain part of a system they no longer trusted or believed in. And in moments like this, when that system is facing serious questions about accountability, transparency, and institutional protection of problematic behavior, their exit looks less like betrayal and more like integrity. That's not hagiography. That's not blind support. That's just acknowledging what the timeline shows. They left. They were destroyed in the press for leaving, and now the institution they left is embroiled in exactly the kind of crisis that would have forced them into silence had they stayed. Let's talk about abolition, because Dr. Shola went there, and it's worth examining seriously. The call to abolish the monarchy is not new. It predates Andrew. It predates Charles. It predates Elizabeth. It predates modern scandal entirely. It is a long-standing political and philosophical argument about governance, democratic accountability, inherited power, and whether a constitutional monarchy makes sense in a modern democratic society. What moments like this do is intensify that argument. They provide concrete examples that fuel abstract debates. Because monarchy, particularly the British monarchy, relies heavily on moral authority, on symbolism, on the idea of steady guardianship above the mess of politics, on representing continuity, duty, service. That's the brand. That's the justification for the institution's existence and its public funding. When scandal after scandal chips away at that moral authority, when the institution appears more focused on self-preservation than accountability, the symbolic shield weakens. People begin asking fundamental questions. Why is this structure immune from the accountability we demand of other institutions? Why is this family insulated in ways that other public figures are not? Why does accountability feel slower, softer, more negotiated when it involves royalty? Why are we funding an institution that appears to prioritize its own protection over moral courage? Those are not irrational questions. Those are not questions from fringe extremists. Those are civic questions that deserve serious engagement. And Dr. Shola is articulating a frustration that many, many people feel, that institutional loyalty appears to consistently override moral urgency. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth that the monarchy has to confront. The monarchy survives on public perception, not divine right, that's long gone, not mystical legitimacy. We live in a rational age. Perception, public support, the consent of the governed, even if that consent is passive. If enough people perceive shielding, narrative manipulation, selective accountability, or institutional self-protection at the expense of justice, that symbolic power erodes. And once symbolic power erodes, constitutional debates become louder and more mainstream. That is the real existential risk for the monarchy. It's not Andrew alone. He's one individual whose behavior and judgment have been catastrophic. It's cumulative credibility damage. It's the slow accumulation of incidents where the institution appears to prioritize itself over principle. And in an age of social media, in an era where information flows instantly and global audiences watch in real time, perception can shift quickly. What makes this moment particularly explosive is the convergence of three factors. First, legal action. This isn't just tabloid speculation anymore. There are actual legal processes happening. Real authorities are involved. That changes everything. Second, historical receipts. We have video, we have photographs, we have documented timelines. We have Andrew's own words in that night suit interview. We have statements made at the time. The public record exists and it's comprehensive. Third, a digital public that does not forget. This is the factor that changes the entire game. The old model of crisis management relied on short memory cycles. A scandal would hit, newspapers would cover it intensely for a period, then another story would come along. The news cycle would move on, public attention would shift, control would gradually return. But we live in an entirely different era now. Clips resurface in seconds, contradictions are archived permanently, public statements from years ago are compared side by side with current statements. Screenshots exist forever. Video receipts are eternal. When today's narrative conflicts with yesterday's documented optics, trust fractures publicly and immediately. That is what Dr. Shola is tapping into. This isn't about emotion alone. It's about consistency. It's about documented behavior versus current claims. If William was always opposed to Andrew, show the documented pressure he applied at the time. If Charles acted decisively, show the timeline of decisive action. If the palace had no knowledge of Epstein's activities and Andrew's association with him, explain what safeguards existed and how they failed. Transparency is the only antidote to suspicion. Narrative management without transparency just breeds more cynicism. Now, let's address the emotional undercurrent driving public reaction, because it's important. People are tired of institutions protecting themselves first and asking questions later. Whether it's politics, corporations, religious institutions, or monarchy, there is growing public intolerance for elite insulation from consequences. We've seen it with financial institutions after economic crashes. We've seen it with religious institutions after abuse scandals. We've seen it with political institutions after corruption revelations. The pattern is always similar. Initial denial, then minimal acknowledgement, then narrative management, then moving forward without full accountability. And people are exhausted by it. Andrew's situation crystallizes that frustration because it intersects multiple volatile elements: power, privilege, serious criminal allegations, elite social networks, and an institution that appears more concerned with managing fallout than confronting root problems. When the response feels calculated rather than courageous, when it feels like crisis management rather than moral leadership, anger grows. And in this context, the Sussex departure reads, to their supporters at least, as a refusal to be part of that machinery. Not rebellion for drama or attention, not betrayal for commercial gain, but exit for integrity, exit for autonomy, exit because remaining meant complicity. That framing is powerful, and power shifts when narratives shift. Right now, the monarchy is facing not just a legal storm around one member, but a credibility reckoning. William's current distancing from Andrew may protect the future crown in the short term. It positions him as the reformer, the modernizer, the one who gets it. But if the public perceives that distancing as opportunistic, as convenient moral positioning that wasn't there when it would have cost something, it backfires. Charles's steadiness, his keep calm and carry on approach, may project stability in uncertain times. But if that calm reads as reluctance to confront hard truths, if it looks like prioritizing family loyalty over institutional accountability, it erodes confidence rather than building it. Institutions survive scandals when they confront them head-on, when they demonstrate that principles matter more than protection, when they show that no one is above accountability. They weaken, sometimes fatally, when they appear to manage optics more aggressively than they pursue accountability. That is the tension the monarchy is navigating right now. And that is precisely why Dr. Shola's commentary is resonating so powerfully with so many people, because she is saying out loud what millions are thinking. You cannot rewrite the past in real time and expect people not to notice. You cannot selectively remember and pretend the internet doesn't archive everything. And you cannot expect the public to suspend logic, ignore timelines, and accept convenient narratives just because they're delivered through official channels. This moment is bigger than one arrest. This moment is bigger than one disgraced prince. It is a referendum on institutional credibility. It is a stress test of institutional transparency. It is a live demonstration of whether legacy institutions can adapt to an era of instant information, permanent records, and global scrutiny. And it is a reminder that in 2025, institutions answer not just to tradition or established protocols, but to a global audience armed with smartphones, screenshots, and long memories. The monarchy may endure this moment. It's survived worse historically. It may reform, genuinely reform, not just cosmetically adjust. It may double down on tradition and weather the storm through sheer institutional inertia. But it cannot pretend the internet has amnesia. It cannot pretend that narratives constructed today won't be checked against receipts from yesterday. It cannot operate as if information control is still possible in the age of social media. And as for Harry and Meghan, their distance from the institution now looks less like exile and more like insulation. Their choice to leave looks less like abandonment and more like self-preservation. Their willingness to face public vilification rather than remain looks less like weakness and more like strength. Sometimes the bravest decision is leaving a system you no longer trust. Sometimes stepping away is actually stepping ahead. Sometimes refusing to be part of the machinery is the most moral choice available. History is watching this moment. History is recording. History is archiving. And this time, history has Wi-Fi. Dr. Shola said what needed to be said. She challenged what needed to be challenged. She asked questions that deserve answers. And whether you agree with her conclusions or not, you cannot deny that she identified patterns worth examining. So let's keep examining. Let's keep questioning. Let's keep demanding that institutions, all institutions, meet the standards of accountability they claim to uphold. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you appreciate honest, critical analysis of royal family issues, subscribe to this channel. We're here for truth, not fairy tales. Until next time, stay critical, stay informed, and never stop asking questions. I'll see you in the next one.